Welcome to People in Innovation, a CPI podcast where we explore the extraordinary and impactful stories of our drive to innovate and create a better future for people, places, and our planet. From groundbreaking discoveries to the challenges behind the breakthroughs, we shine a light on the people behind the innovations that are shaping our future. I'm Frank Millar, the Chief Executive at CPI, and today we're talking to Katherine Bennett, the Chief Executive of the High Value Manufacturing Catapult, and Steve Bagshaw, the Chair of the High Value Manufacturing Catapult Board. Hi Katherine, and hi Steve. We've been having these conversations with customers, stakeholders. This is a really important conversation. CPI's 20 years, probably half of that as a member of the High Value Manufacturing Catapult. And, we've journeyed together to explore this magical world of innovation and delivering impact for the UK economy. And it feels like we're in the second phase of the High Value Manufacturing Catapult. Katherine, you and I are probably both in role around the same time, having seen, several years of growth and success within the High Value Manufacturing Catapult. And it feels like we're moving on to a new phase. I was just wondering if that's what it feels like to you.
Well, thanks, Frank, for inviting me, and congratulations to CPI on your 20-year anniversary. It's incredibly significant when you think about the industry challenges we have, and demonstrates the need for organisations such as yours. They always say second's the best, so maybe the second era is the time when some even greater things happen. So the Manufacturing Catapult's been around since 2011. CPI were right at the heart and centre of the inauguration of the Catapult. So thank you again to you and your teams for the effort and work you put into getting us off the ground. So yeah, the second era is exciting, new dawn. We have a new government now, and there's huge opportunities in terms of industrial strategy, which is, I think, a real sweet spot for us all.
Something that I think has, I felt much more strongly in the last few years, and it's sort of been with us all the way, but perhaps we've just noticed it much more clearly, is the role of place, and in particular this conversation around industrial transformation. As the High Value Manufacturing Catapult, as CPI, as some of our colleague centres, we seem to have landed in places where we were really needed. There was a big gap. It could have been industrial heritage. It could have been the consequences of shifting industries. And we've seemed to been at the start of this transformation journey for many places. For CPI, that's been, recently it's been Net Park and in Sedgefield and Darlington, and then up in Glasgow. You've started to see, in your experience, particularly in the west of England, you've started to see a lot of that across the network. And I just think it's an interesting conversation to have around how do we get into this role of industrial transformation agent in an authentic way as a Catapult network.
I think regions and local communities have always really cared passionately about the companies and the jobs that are in their area. But I think what we've done is turn the page in terms of being a bit bolder. And I think the new industrial strategy, I was fairly involved in the last one, the new industrial strategy has a real focus, as you said, Frank, on regions, and actually what do regions want in terms of their industrial development. And it's fascinating for me. I remember when I first arrived 3.5 years ago to see the foundations and the history behind each of our sites. We have 27 sites across the UK, length and breadth of the UK. And yes, the Net Park story that CPI did is incredible, and very proud to be part of telling the story about what happened there. And of course, the investments that CPI have also made in Renfrewshire, next to one of our other centres up in Scotland near Glasgow Airport, that has really cemented the huge opportunities that having a centre in an area where there is capability, there is cluster, but you can really ensure that it builds up on those opportunities. There's many other things happening across the UK, many other catapults as well. But I think what's been fascinating is how centres such as CPI started in the first place. It was a result of regional intervention, but that's not enough. You need the dynamic leadership, you need the companies to understand what the purpose is of the centres and how they can help. And I think that's why it is really exciting that industrial strategy really focuses on regional development this time round.
And we've had some interesting experiences recently working out how we play the right role in a devolution era, if you like, if you want to put it that way, as a national organisation, but also one that's very local, very focused, very, very sort of, we're a neighbour to many of our customers and partners in those regions. And, you and I have explored things around Manchester. You've been very involved in South Wales. How do you think devolution's going to complement the national mission that we have as a Catapult?
It's a tribute to the people who actually were around at the beginning of setting up centres and also catapults. That catapults become very popular things. Nearly every metro mayor I talk to or leaders of the devolved nations say, we want a catapult, we want a centre. Well, that's great, but there is a challenge for us. And as you say, we as a team have had to look very carefully about how we allocate that very precious taxpayer money. And what's really evolved in the last few months, and CPI colleagues have been very instrumental in this, is what type of intervention should we make? Should we work directly with an existing innovation partner? Should we work with a university, or a combination of the two? Usually it's a combination of the two. But also you have to understand the local area. So as you said, I have been very involved in the Port Talbot situation. We've now opened an office in South Wales, just a small office with a bit of a demonstration centre. The reason for doing that is to understand the local geography, understand the local economy, and more importantly, understand what the local leaders want. And I think the experience we've had across the UK at many of our centres has really helped us get our route through the framework for those decisions to be made.
Brilliant. Thanks, Catherine. I'm going to turn to Steve in a second, but I think I'd like to come back and talk a little later about the future and opportunities. Steve, if I can turn to you. You've been the full journey here. You've been a customer of CPI. You've been a fantastic national level sponsor for many things that CPI is interested in, particularly in the old days, industrial biotechnology, now engineering biology. You're on the board of CPI and another chair of the High Value Manufacturing Catapult. So you do have some unique lenses on the world of CPI and 20 years. And in fact, you opened our National Biologics Manufacturing Centre in Darlington in 2016. So I just would love to hear your perspective on that journey, really, how you've experienced CPI, the Catapult network, and what does that mission look like to you now, having seen it from so many angles and probably been able to test it and examine it in ways that many others wouldn't have been able to?
Well, first of all, let me join Catherine in saying congratulations, Frank. 20 years is a milestone that in 2014 we had a great birthday party for your 10th anniversary, and I was very honoured to be able to speak at that. And it was definitely very different for me in 2014 to how I feel now in 2024, having, as you said, crossed the fence, if you like, and joined the board of CPI and now HVMC. I started in Teesside in 2004 working, which is exactly 20 years ago. And so we were building a biomanufacturing capability in Billingham in Teesside about the time that CPI was starting to form out of the One Northeast world, and the sort of the influence of Durham and Newcastle universities. And that journey, I remember in 2007 being asked to come and talk about business processes, because that was what we were trying to do was very complementary to what CPI was trying to do, which was to help companies that hadn't got capability of their own use a capability that they didn't have to buy and invest into. And we were trying to do that privately in biomanufacturing for healthcare, and you were doing it at the time for industrial biotechnology. And so we were very complementary in what we were doing. And from those early days, the ecosystem in the Northeast grew together in bio because CPI was successful in doing what they were doing in terms of industrial biotech, in terms of some of the things you were doing up at Net Park in Sedgefield. And then, of course, that marvellous day when the news came through that National Biologics Manufacturing Centre had got funding. And I remember picking the phone up to Nigel Perry, your predecessor, and saying to him, how can we help? What are you planning to do? How can we be a partner in what you're doing? Because we were just 11 miles down the road and growing quite considerably in terms of what we were doing. And we saw that as complementary, what was happening. And I think that's been one of the strengths of CPI throughout its 20 years, is moving towards being complementary to the market and trying to create new markets and not trying to do what the market was capable of doing itself. And that's been a tough journey, because that requires you to keep undoing stuff that you perhaps were uniquely doing 5 years previously, but now the market catches you up. And all of a sudden now the capability needs to move on. And so some of the market making that you've done as CPI, I've been, just in awe of, actually, in terms of some of the things that, some of the deep tech influences that CPI has had on the UK have just really done things that you couldn't have done with private industry alone. You needed to have this unique way of working with academia, with SMEs, but also with bigger companies who were perhaps not quite ready to invest themselves in a certain area. So when you got the National Formulation Centre, for instance, in Sedgefield, you were able to create a capability that you've had people queuing up to come and use, because there wasn't that piece. And you've got people from paints all the way over to, all the way through agrochemicals, all the way to of course, the unique bit you then did for the vaccine world of helping those lipid nanoparticles that were the piece that got us mRNA vaccines. And, one of the unsung pieces of that story, of those days, which you might want to touch on again later, but one of the unsung pieces of that was the role CPI had in helping that technology commercialize so quickly and get it to a place where you could inject human beings at the time we had to. So for me, I joined the board in 2020 of CPI, 2019, maybe 2020, when I was just finishing in private in my role as Fujifilm Diosynth chief exec. And I got a new insight. I chaired we'd got such a fabulous board that we inherited, that I came in. You were taking over about the same time as I joined the board. They were they'd been the founding fathers and mothers of this business. And those names, I think, that all have we paid tribute to, all played their part in helping guide CPI to where it was. And I was really honoured, actually, to be standing on their shoulders to help the CPI of 2020 do what it did and play its role. The role of Catapult then, and the way in which you merge the capabilities of the centres that we have across the UK, and the work we've done with Cell and Gene Therapy Catapult, with Medicines Discovery Catapult, the work that we're now doing in offshore renewables. If you look at all the Catapult network that we have, CPI has a unique position in that, of playing its part in HVM Catapult's ability to work with these other players. And I've stood on the shoulders of giants in CPI. I now feel that in HVM Catapult. I think that the players that have been our predecessors, Catherine, in terms of the names that we're proud to talk about, of people who played their part in making us what we are today. It's a real. These are. The UK PLC would not be what it is today without some of that work. The innovation translation, the acceleration of innovation, the market making that's being done is a unique capability. And I think it's one that, I think it's something that, my journey has mirrored, I think, the impact the CPI, the centres and the Catapult have had. And I'm proud to play a part in it.
I think it's so interesting as you sort of talk about the history. There are there are sort of several moments that I can recall where you just get that little piece of wisdom from somebody else that really gives you the insight as to why are we doing this, and sometimes how do we do this, because it's a complex landscape. And this idea of, are we competing with other people? Are we collaborating with them? Because we have to go out and earn our corn. You know, it's not all about public money. You've got to go and find the private money that comes in as well. And the idea of choices, and there are certain characters in our past, some sadly no longer with us. I think about people like Colin Harrison. And Colin was somebody who would say, don't give me either or, it's a both and world. You know, you've got to go and do more and then more again. You know, some of Nigel, you know, Nigel's classics around often delivered with an expletive or two, about going and finding out things.
Yes.
You know, you don't wait for them to come to you. Go and find things out. You know.
Yeah.
And you sometimes had a sense of being dispatched on a mission to go and find out what was happening. And then I remember when we were doing the work with industry to put the Metals Manufacturing Centre together up in Glasgow, again, part of the last industrial strategy, I think shows the benefit of a well-conceived industrial strategy. And one of our customers, we were in the room doing the workshop thing, trying to work out what are we trying to do here. And he used a phrase, he said, you know, and it was getting quite difficult to work our way through this. And he said, look, it's just really simple. I don't want you to do anything I can do myself in the next 5 years.
Yes, exactly.
And there's just that real moment of clarity about looking beyond the immediate horizon, thinking about the next evolution of manufacturing, and what industry needs.
And can I say this? I think, you know, we talk a lot about capability and, you know, you build assets, but one of the biggest impacts, I think, that Catapult, and in my experience is very CPI dominated in Catapult, but I think one of the impacts you had on our business, so Fujifilm Diosynth, was the influence that you had on the way we were thinking as senior management about. So Nigel was very clear about, you know, we need to be one of the 4 dots on the map globally to have a capability that people will come to. And that focus was something we adopted. You know, what Sophie did when she was looking at the ways in which you interact with universities and the way in which you can't spread yourself so too thinly. You did a fantastic job of creating a CPI strategy for how you would interact with academics in a way that was meaningful without just smearing yourself across the whole place. We just looked at that and thought that was brilliant and basically adopted it and made it our own. And so one of the reasons I think that we were successful was because we were in an ecosystem that had original thinkers like yourselves in that ecosystem. And I think that's one of the things, Catherine, that as we look at UK, the impact that Catapult can be in the UK is we underestimate at our peril the wisdom of the leaders of and the leadership teams and the experts we've got, because that can be translated into something way more than just, you know, an ability to come in and use our facilities.
You have to remember the word genius, ingenuity is all similar with being an engineer. And that's one of the things I find most fascinating. We've got 3,500 people working across our centres. And the things that they find out, the ideas they come up with are so energising and interesting. And business partners, and it's interesting to hear Steve's perspective, business partners love that. They love going to hear about ideas. I mean, on engineering biology, one of your team did a presentation to me the other day, and she talked about opportunities in space. I mean, that completely and utterly blew my mind, which you would never have thought that is something that we could do here and how we could help. I think the other way of looking at the benefits of working across the Catapult system is if you look at the impact that we have. And, you know, the government put money into us through Innovate UK, part of UKRI, and we have a clearly thought out strategy about how that money is spent. About every year, around £609 million is added to the UK's GVA through the work we do across your centre and across the other centres that make up the Catapult. And that's not to be sniffed at.
Yeah. Catherine, can we just talk a little bit more about impact, but in particular SMEs and the critical role that SMEs have in stimulating and responding to new markets, innovation, and how I think we've again journeyed together as a collective to discover the huge potential and realise the huge potential that's in SMEs. How important SMEs are in the work that we do.
I mean, the UK has a huge number of SMEs, and we want more in manufacturing. There's a huge number in manufacturing. We always want more. That's part of our mission. And yes, sometimes SMEs don't always know what they want, and they can come and talk to people in our centres about, I've got this particular problem, I don't know how to deal with it. And one of our engineers can sit down and go, actually, we did this for another customer, not sharing intellectual property, but we can see the problem you've got and try and help fix it. They also need help generally in how to develop their business. We wouldn't dare try and tell them how to design things, but we can help them commercialise things. And that's one of the key things that we're really developing more of a specialty in. And it's also one of the things I find most exciting about the Catapult is the role we do on foresighting. So we could help an SME go, well, this might not work for that particular market you're looking at, but actually as a result of the analysis we've done, you might want to think about this direction. Now, we would all love, I hope you'd agree, we would all love to do more to help SMEs. We have a finite resource. We have to make sure we use that in a smart, measurable way. And the best story is when I hear one SME telling another SME, you go and speak to CPI. That's the best kind of advert you can have.
Great, thank you. The other angle I want to explore with you both, because you both worked for large companies, and I dare say have had to make the case to bring investment to the UK for the companies that you've worked for. So that whole inward investment dynamic, it's something we think about a lot. It's part of the place agenda. It's part of the making a contribution to UK manufacturing. As the High Value Manufacturing Catapult, as one of the centres within that, what are your thoughts on what could we do even better? What's the both and version, if you like, of investment in?
I think one of the things about inward investment is people sometimes overlook the fact it's very people. People are so important in this. Indeed. Totally. One of the things you look at, why, for instance, my company decided it would invest in the UK. There's a high degree of trust of the UK management, but then also when they came to the region or when they came to look, we were able to bring people out who looked like the sorts of people you wanted to do business with. They were knowledgeable. They did what they said they were going to do. They turned up when they said they were going to do. They were of a rank that meant that people felt that they were special in a way. And we sometimes underestimate the use of some of the people that we have, and you think, well, what good would it do to meet the mayor of a place? It makes a huge difference to meet the mayor. If you bring a company to this country and they meet the mayor, and the mayor takes time to spend just talking about what she or he is trying to do, it's massive. And I think that's a really important part of our convening ability. You talked to Katherine a little bit about local agenda. I think we know in our centres what the local landscape looks like for people. And I think trying to build up that rapport with the local groups such that you can help bring the right team out to help, if there's an inward mission, for instance, to a region, we know through our centres what to do. You and I, if Tees Valley, we could probably write the 5 people you'd want them to meet. And that's important because not everybody's got that. And I think we can support companies that are looking for that too. So, and you go, well, how do you get money out of that then? You're actually trying to create this long-term, not only do we have a core business, but we also have this greater business, which is how do you make this ecosystem successful? And I think people are a massive part of that. So the fact I saw photos of you with the Tees Valley Innovation Agenda. with the mayor next to you and all the things that were happening. And I was thinking, what a brilliant advert for Tees Valley, for the UK, for CPI, for HVM Catapult. You look at it and you go, but I'll bet you that took some time, and you're a busy man. But the fact that you're able to do that and convene that, and all our centre leaders think is something really important.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I've worked for two major multinational companies, one very American, one very European, and they do have a very different approach. The Americans very focused on what's the labour relations like, or they also look at investment opportunities. Are there any tax incentives? Europeans take a slightly different view. I'm not saying they don't think about things like that, but they do compare what other nations do. And the fact we have an industrial strategy, again, really helps. Catapults really help. Of course, catapults were based on a concept that was already existing in Germany. So let's learn and build on that. I think the other thing on inward investment, you should never take anyone for granted. And I think that has been perhaps a failing in the past. And I think we as business people, we as people in the innovation space have a responsibility for that. As Steve just said, get the local army around to say this is a great place to invest. I don't know about you, but I think businesses do listen to other businesses. Oh yeah, think about moving to XYZ. They do ask opinions of others. It's not just the consultants. As you're probably aware, the government are looking very closely at the recommendations done by a gentleman called Lord Harrington, who did a big review about the inward investment offering we have, and they're really putting a lot of effort into that. I would like us, as part of the High Value Manufacturing Catapult, to be part of that inward investment army. We're a massive national asset. Our universities also help with that, don't they? I mean, you get that feedback a lot from investors. Yeah. So I think there's actually more we could do within the capabilities and our resources we have to be part of that outward advertising for the UK, and that's the way to get more confidence.
Brilliant, thank you. I'd like to sort of close perhaps and just explore the future. I've had the opportunity to sit just the last few weeks, just seem to have been peppered with conversations about, the role of China, what's happening in the US. We're working our way into a new government, as you say, a new industrial strategy. But you have to come back and say, what are we capable of doing with the privilege we have to receive public money, the mission we have to help to transform landscapes, to develop UK manufacturing, UK industry. And, if our predecessors or my predecessor was sitting here 20 years ago and said, look, in 20 years' time, I'd quite like to be here, what would our next 20-year wish be for this fantastic network that we had?
I think we need to hold dear to our core mission, which is helping manufacturers. There's an expression I like to use a lot, is that we de-risk innovation, and that helps also with the SME patch. We've all got big ideas. I mean, I think you'd agree, Frank, in some of the meetings we have, we'd love to save the world. But the most important thing is to keep close to that mission, but also keep a really close eye on what's happening in the market, what's happening in technology, make sure we've got access to the best minds we can. We've got the ability to do that in the UK. I think there's real opportunities, hydrogen, the work being done, as we've talked about earlier, on engineering biology. Let's catalyse that. Let's collaborate well. Something the UK is always quite famous for. We're quite good at partnerships, and I would like us to use our partnership expertise to help us into the third era of the catapult, you could say.
Thanks, Catherine. I think we talk a lot about UK PLC. I think if you're talking 20 years, the global mission is also important. I think 20 years, none of us can expect the climate to look the same as it does today in 20 years. I think there's going to have to be some real innovation done at pace, because we're not going to, the way in which it works, the crisis has to hit us. Pandemic hit us, and we responded. I think climate is hitting us, nature and biodiversity issues are hitting us, and we've got to be capable to use what we've got, the skills and abilities to do, to help the world find its solutions to that. And the UK will get, I think we've got some great opportunities in the UK, but I think it's going to get done to us because the world is changing as we watch it. And we, sadly for our own children's generation, we're not moving fast enough. And we need to move at a pace to create solutions to some of the, fossil will have to stop. We have to stop putting carbon into the atmosphere. Therefore, engineering biology is going to race into a world where we need to be using it. And I think it's up to us to be capable of helping manufacturers quickly adopt technologies that today they're perhaps not even thinking of doing. And that's something we've got to be doing in parallel with this. And I think the industrial strategy, with its 10-year view, will also give us an opportunity to influence it to be, climate emergency ready.
And as you said earlier, it is also about people, isn't it? So let's catalyse the skills. We've got a lot of work to do helping that. And I think there's opportunities for the UK to make a real difference on the net zero challenges.
Yeah, I think what you said before, Catherine, about foresighting, we've been able to. I think we've had those moments where sort of the clouds have parted and we've been able to see a direction and been able to pursue those. I also find that you get this immense complementarity where you're pursuing one thing and then suddenly you discover that, there's an entire complementarity in another area. And I think about digital and sustainability. Yeah. You can pursue either of those, but when you find the moment where they join, you just get this massive acceleration of technology adoption and of the art of the possible. And that's what excites me about the next 20 years is the things we haven't thought of, or the things we hadn't thought to join up yet. But the moment will come driven by, the essentials of response to a crisis or, a moment where you say we can't let this moment pass. And you join those things together.
There's a great example, the work you do with WMG, one of our sister centres based at the University of Warwick, the Advanced Materials Battery Industrialisation Centre. That's probably not something a few years ago you would have thought possible, and it's fascinating when that kind of evolves.
Yeah, and Steve, you mentioned the pandemic and vaccines and lipid nanoparticles, and it took me a little while, but when we debriefed on a lot of that, you could actually pick up the conversation that happened between two individuals that caused two thoughts to connect to create a third idea, which is what led to some of that activity. Decided we were working with RNA before the pandemic because somebody had said, look, this is quite an interesting area. It's not that mainstream. We should have a look at this. We bought a piece of equipment that was in the National Formulation Centre, which, my colleague Graham Cruikshank had said, there isn't actually one of these readily available. We need to be working with nanomaterials. We need to be thinking a lot more about nanomaterials. And suddenly an RNA thought in one place and a nanomaterials thought in another place connect together. And here we are now with an RNA Centre of Excellence where you can actually encapsulate the RNA. So I want to see those moments where those big global industrial challenges suddenly become accessible through through the joining of those ideas.
So one of the interesting things about engineering biology is the breadth of the solutions that you can get from engineering biology. So if you think of where, if you take the definition as being the use of biological processes or the use of biofeedstocks in manufacture, for want of a better phrase, and look at the feed. So you're talking about food, you're talking about fuel, you're talking about chemicals, materials, and you're talking about healthcare. So if you think of those 5 areas that you're using what we call engineering biology to actually create products that the market needs in those areas, it's a long history, because if you think about where fermentation has come from, on food, we've been fermentation since, Noah on the ark.
Yeah.
If you look at some of the things that are happening in chemicals, some of the earliest chemicals that, the earliest pharmaceuticals that were being made, real impact, but in terms of what they were doing with fermentation. So we've got this history of using it. But the modern world has been, understanding DNA, and then the biotechnology revolution that healthcare brought about in the early 80s, and then the growth of companies like Genentech and others who just basically drove biotech into pharmaceuticals. And you've then got everyone behind them in terms of what happens next. And so in chemicals and materials, you're kind of trying to look at the way in which you use non-fossil-based feedstocks, or you're using a biological process to try and create steps that might have taken multiple stages in chemistry, but actually with biology you can reduce it all down to one, an enzymatic stage, where you just basically get something chewing away at whatever you've started with. And it's the biological process. You can see it in the garden as you're composting. You can see all of these biological processes going on. So harnessing that for engineering is where engineering biology is. And the engineering bit is chopping it up into its constituent parts and bringing the chemistry and physics of each of those stages to a place where you can apply potentially machine learning or anything that would, instead of being in vivo everywhere, i.e. live, you can do it in silico. So in other words, you can computer predict how you're going to do these stages. And that's just been transformational across the world. There are companies now that are set up to just do what would have taken lab bench biologists years to do. And they're basically doing it, they're screening for proteins. They're creating programs that will give you the answer in milliseconds. That is just unthinkable. And that's the huge opportunity. That's something we couldn't do 15, 20 years ago. That's the big change. And that's what engineering biology, that's why it's so exciting. It's why the government's chosen to make it now, make it one of its priorities. And you can see biosurfactants, you can see bio fuels, you can see bio materials that are being used. The opportunity is just slowly creating a market for these products. Where will Catapult be? Well, Catapult is right at the heart of how you do that and actually create financially viable ways of doing it.
The door of the government is open on engineering biology, and it's time for us to go and smash it through.
Yeah, we in the mid for whatever we call the teens, we did some work that said that if today the bioeconomy is worth 220 billion, then tomorrow by 2030 we could get it to 440 billion, because it's just such a massive field. And thousands of people are working in the bioeconomy today and don't realise they're in it.
Yeah.
Every farmer is really part of the bioeconomy. What we do with that and help them be more productive in what they're doing is exactly what the bioeconomy and bioengineering biology is about. So it's everything from a micro business to the largest businesses on earth in terms of the opportunity. So it's fantastic, and it's a great opportunity.
Here's to the next 20 years.
Indeed. Absolutely. Thank you both for your time. Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
That was Katherine and Steve from the High Value Manufacturing Catapult on People in Innovation, a CPI podcast. Thank you for listening, and make sure to join in on more conversations with people that are shaping our future. You can learn more about CPI by visiting uk-cpi.com. Let's innovate together.